The US dollar, as you might know, is the currency that not only the United States uses, but also several other nations use as their official currency. The dollar is known as the reserve currency of the world. So, how did the US dollar come to be so strong? Currently, there is more than $1.8 trillion worth of US dollars in circulation worldwide, with an estimated 2/3 of $100 bills and around 50% of $50 bills circulated outside of the US. The US dollar is the official global currency, which means that most people and businesses trust it for international trade, and many governments keep it in reserve. The global market disruption caused by the coronavirus pandemic, which destroyed assets worth trillions of dollars, had no impact on the value of the dollars. The dollar is strong because of the US economy and people's desire to hold dollars. Investors look out for what's known as safe havens, which is the investments that are supposed to maintain their value through market panic. The American dollar is regarded as such because it comes from the politically and economically stable United States, which has the greatest economy in the world. And while the value of the dollar will always fluctuate, it probably won't fall suddenly like other currencies. During economic crisis, the demand for dollars can lead to shortages, making the bigger issue worse. The Federal Reserve, which is in charge of issuing the currency in America, goes above and above to avoid pressure when there is a demand for the dollar. For example, it started establishing swap lines with other large central banks during the financial and coronavirus crisis to guarantee adequate money available for investment and spending. This helps regulate currency markets during periods of high demand for the US dollar. But how did the US dollar come to dominate the global currency market? Well, for a very long period, the currencies of developed nations were connected to gold. However, several nations gave up the gold standard and began funding their militaries with paper money during the First World War. The US dollar, which was still connected to gold, eventually defeated the British pound to take the top spot among reserve currencies. Now, why do these bigger nations don't like the supremacy of the US dollar? Since the US dollar has taken over the world economy, it is normal for other competing nations to try to weaken it, because every country wants to dominate the economy of other countries and weaken the currency. So, as a geopolitical plan, China and Russia are also tying up behind the curtains to weaken the US dollar, and their plan has been working quite well in the last 10 years. The market share of the US dollar among the world's reserve currencies was 71% in 1999, but it has since fallen to less than 59%. If China and Russia's strategy is successful, a new reserve currency in the form of the Chinese yuan may emerge within the next 10 years. What are China and Russia's plans? China has a long beef with the US. It is furious with the US for helping Taiwan, and Russia is already the nation with the most sanctions imposed upon it for attacking Ukraine. As a result, Russia can no longer conduct business using its dollar accounts, and the majority of its businesses have also been dropped from the SWIFT network. As a result of the two superpowers being threatened by US, both of them became angry and came together to destroy the US. Since Russia is one of the major producers of oil and gas, even though Saudi Arabia and other nations were selling their products in dollars, Russia punished its opponents by demanding them to purchase its products in rubles. As a result, even though most European nations hated Putin for it, they were forced to purchase rubles, which meant that all the nations that purchased oil from Russia suddenly had to keep their money in the Russian state bank rather than in US banks. Therefore, just as dollar reserves help to strengthen the American economy, it is expected that ruble reserves will help to make up for the harm done to the Russian economy, which leads to petro-ruble rising just like the petrodollar. Additionally, if you look at Russia's actions, Russia has been getting ready to get rid of the US dollar since 2014 from its reserves. And as a result, US treasuries decreased from $150 billion in 2013 to approximately $3.98 billion as of 2021. This is the power of Russia in Europe. Similarly, China can control countries that are part of the BRI. BRI is a $3 trillion initiative in which China has generously provided assistance to nations all around the world. 165 poor countries worldwide owe China a total of $385 billion in debt, and several of these nations have borrowed so much money from China that they are unable to repay it. And it is at this point that China makes its strategic move, because it now has control over these nations. According to experts, China would now ask these countries to accept and repay loans in yuan. In exchange, China might promote the initiative by offering them a 1% interest rate discount. Also, China is now the largest trading partner with 25 BRI countries, proving once more how powerful Chinese trade is. As a result, China could increase pressure on these nations to use the yuan rather than the dollar. In this way, China could sooner or later organize a network of 165 countries, significantly increasing the circulation of the yuan. Now the question is, how can China and Russia encourage wealthy nations like South Korea and England to reject the dollar? First of all, Russia actively supports China and has already established the Chinese yuan as the reserve currency. And the fact that they have a bilateral currency swap agreement makes this an important move. Now, two main players can do worldwide business without depending on the US currency. And the most interesting thing is that Beijing has signed more bilateral currency swap deals totaling more than $3 trillion a year with more than 40 nations across the world, including 400 billion yuan each with Hong Kong and South Korea, 350 billion yuan with the Bank of England and the European Central Bank, 300 billion yuan with Singapore, and 150 billion yuan with Russia. On top of that, since China is the largest manufacturer in the world, responsible for about 20% of global manufacturing, they might use this to put pressure on businesses to make them accept payments in yuan rather than in dollars. Additionally, Saudi Arabia is now considering selling oil in yuan, which means that if Saudi Arabia begins selling oil in yuan, many nations will buy yuan, bringing the petrodollar's monopoly to an end. On the other side, the extra yuan would then be invested in Chinese bonds, strengthening the Chinese economy. This is how China and Russia are quietly developing their currency strategies to replace the US dollar as the reserve currency. Does this indicate that the yuan will replace the dollar? Not really. The reputation that both China and Russia have in the world will be their first obstacle. Russia has already been surrounded by the West, and China has a history for using dead trap diplomacy and also invading Taiwan. Secondly, China has been very frequently weakening its currency itself because of bad decisions. The United States has even accused China of currency manipulation. And also, it is now clearly known that China is less transparent than the US, which will discourage nations from switching to the yuan when the dollar is more trustworthy. Finally, America definitely hates the rising of the yuan, and by using its great economic and military power, the US can easily put pressure on China to weaken the yuan.